It's been a long time. 20 years since I slipped on the shoes. Staring out over the dance floor like a cold and unforgiving ocean. The eyes of the judges and spectators looking down on me like unimpressed stars. Fear of stage fright taking hold like the icy grip of a November wind. It's times like these that I really miss my sister. Dharma was my twin sister, and my name's Dylan. Our parents were both brilliant dancers, so we were introduced to it about as soon as we could stand. Dharma was brilliant. Dharma was always brilliant. Her instructors and tutors would always tell everybody so, but especially me. "Did you see how your sister did that?" they'd ask me. "Why don't you move with the same grace as Dharma? What will get you on the same level as your sister? Why aren't you good enough, Dylan?" I hated it. I hated it so much that I'd cry. Worse than cry, I would become incapable of crying. That desperate sadness turned into pain. Pain I didn't know how to express. Pain that barely as an adult knows what to do with, much less a child. I guess it started with Dharma's shoes. I don't know why. I don't know why shoes. She hadn't done anything to me that morning. It was before class. Dharma had just finished her breakfast. I had already eaten, of course, and I was sitting in the foyer. I was already ready to leave. I so much wanted to be better. Not better than my sister, just better. And in the middle of that blind desire, I was sitting right in front of her shoes. It's funny, I can still remember them perfectly. They were a pale rose color with white lace. Everything she owned was one of those kinds of colors. Pale, pastel, overly cutesy. Prim and perfect. Just what a little princess like her would need. I know now that none of this was her fault. She just liked what she liked. But right then, I hated it. I hated the way she got everything that she loved. And everyone loved her for it. I worked and I struggled. I'd practice until I bled from my feet. I'd go over routines until I dreamed in choreography. But she was always right there in the spotlight, and her shadow was always right over top of me. Everyone saw her and those stupid shoes, and not me. So I took those shoes and I ran into the garage. Father always had one of those sliding utility razors that he never remembered to put away. He always left it right next to the stack of empty bottles and flasks. I remember them clinking as I grabbed the knife, and I took it to her shoes. I cut them, and I ruined them. And now Dharma would have to live with something not being perfect. Just like I have to live with myself not being perfect. I didn't notice that Mother had been watching me. She was looking for me since I wasn't in the foyer like I always had been. I really thought she'd be angry with me when I turned around. That's what I expected. But she just stared. Her face had this look of knowing, like she was almost waiting for this to happen. "Were you angry?" she asked me. I was stunned at the calm tone of her voice. "I was," I said. "I am. I'm always so angry, Mother." She bent down and took the blade from my hand. "So angry that you had to destroy your sister's shoes? So angry that if you hadn't, you would have done it to something or someone else, right?" Her question sent a chill down my spine. "Yes, Mother," I answered. Mother took my hand and walked me back into her bedroom, beckoning me to sit on her bed. I had to shove aside a heavy suitcase as she went into her closet and pulled out an old, tattered wooden box. "Sometimes our anger gets in the way of us doing great things," she said. "Your father and I both have too much anger. But when you and your sister were born, my anger went away to make room to love you." Her fingers found the top of my head as she lovingly messed up my hair. I could see through the slow strokes into the sleeves of her shirt. It was a rarity to see much of my mother's skin. She always said she was cold, but I saw marks on her arm. I didn't know what that meant then, but now I don't know how anyone else could have ignored it. Her hand went from my head to the box as she opened it to me. My eyes widened at its contents. A simple, beautiful music box. A surprising contrast to its dull exterior. Ornate hand-carved ash with red velvet lined compartments. Pearl and ivory adorned pedestal at its center. And atop of it was an onyx figurine, faceless, genderless, posed in 5th position. Yet it had this subtle aggression in its presence. Something about it wanted me to feel frightened, but I was inexplicably drawn to it, connected to it. "This is Angelo," my mother said. "I got him when I was about your age, when I was just a little girl. I was very angry, like you. I would want to do terrible things to people who hurt me or wronged me. So, when I was angry, so angry that I needed to do a terrible thing, instead I would tell Angelo." "And he would help you feel better?" I asked. "Even better than that. Whenever I told Angelo about someone making me angry, something would happen to make them stop," she smiled. "Once, someone in my class gave me a fake invitation for her birthday party so that I would go to the wrong place. When I arrived to an empty lot, she and her friends laughed at me. So I told Angelo. And the next day, after her party, her and all the girls who laughed at me did not come to class. They all became ill. And because they were sick, none of them were able to go to the dance recital that week, and I got to dance all by myself. Did Angelo make them all sick? I asked. Food poisoning, dear, she smiled. But Angelo can be mean. I think he likes to believe it was him. My mother closed the box and handed it to me. I have no more anger to tell Angelo about, but I think you have more than enough. Whenever you are angry, talk to him. I promise it will be okay one day. I clutched the box like a holy relic as my mother gave me one last warning. Just be certain that you never speak of Dharma to Angelo. If you love your sibling at all, never say her name in front of him. She hugged me and let me put the box in my room before taking my sister and I to the studio for class. On the way home, we had ice cream. I remember because it wasn't a day when it was allowed on our diets. We laughed and we smiled, and I went to bed, happy, one of the few times. The next morning, my mother was gone. We never asked Father, probably for the best that we didn't find the nerve to try. But it didn't take long to start to figure out why she had left. Also, we were both a little scared of what the truth would be if we had sought after it. Father never hit Dharma. As long as she was busy with her successful dancing career, she was safe. They say that abusive people are brave alone, but a coward in a crowd. And my father wasn't very original when it came to those things. As for me, I did as Mother instructed. I told Angelo about how I felt, at first. Mother's warning weighed heavy on my mind, so I'd never say any names at all, only what was going on, what was making me angry. True to my mother's word, things at class started improving. Little things at first. Instructors that yelled at me or pushed me too hard would strangely fall ill the next day. Substitutes would come in, and I'd be treated a little more fairly because they were not introduced to my sister, or they weren't expecting me to be just as good as her. Father still hated me. I was still living in my sister's shadow. But I had Angelo to talk to, and for a while, that was enough. But then, like all children, I became careless. I remember the day I came home. It was several years later. I had been talking to Angelo rather frequently, and I was eager to tell him about a good day instead of a bad one. I no more than got through the foyer when I found Dharma crying. And I was so confused. I was so strangely overtaken with guilt, even though she insisted at first it was not my fault. That was just as confusing because, as far as I had remembered, everything was my fault. And I remember Dharma saying over and over, "He doesn't mean it, he's just drunk." Dharma didn't say much more than that as she ran upstairs to her room and locked the door, still crying and upset. Shortly thereafter, I started to understand when my father kept on bashing at her door and calling out my mother's name and not hers. My father, when he got drunk, he would get confused, or he would say he was confused as his excuse for his horrible behavior. He could hurt me all that he wanted, but he whatever he chose to do to Dharma was too much. It was fine when it was with me. It could end with me if that's what he wanted, but not her. She was perfect, and I was not. So I became reckless and angry. Angrier than I'd ever been, which was a stark contrast to how calmly I walked back to my room and pulled out that old wooden box, flew open the door, and I said, "Angelo, Angelo, I'm so angry. My father hurt my little sister Dharma. I shut the door as soon as I realized I'd said the word, not knowing how to take back that one rule broken that my mother had given to me. But it was way too late. I no more than shut the door when I heard the doorbell ring. Several bellers from my father to go and get the damn door before I heard it kick in. I heard a strange and eerie clinking sound, like in the rhythm of footsteps, but as though the shoes were made of stone, as though the joints in the knees and hips were grinding against each other like glass. I heard it walk past my room, and then I heard my father screaming. I don't know what exactly Angelo did to my father. I never found anything, nor did the police. They just assumed that he kidnapped my sister, as she was gone too, and I left alone. They never found my mother either, so I was put into the system. A ride in the park by comparison to what I had been through, although I never danced again. Foster families never really seem to have the time or money for those kind of extracurricular activities. But I kept the box. I never used it again. But I did open it once. And there was one slight difference. Angelo wasn't there. Instead, there was a ivory, white, and rose-colored figurine, faceless. I call her Dharma.